Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Facebook live broadcast. I'm Steve Altition, Director of Client Partnerships at Pacific Cascade Legal, and I'm here with our founding attorney, Louis Landerholm, to talk about annulments and how they differ from a divorce or legal separation. Louis, how you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well. This one's kind of interesting because we get a lot of calls and questions about annulment, even though it's not, I mean, it's pretty rare. Um, so we're going to kind of talk about that and, kind of how it differs between the other ways families can split up. So let's just start with the basic question, what is an annulment?
Yeah, basically, an annulment annuls the marriage instead of divides dissolves the marriage. So basically, it acts like the marriage never happened. And so it goes back and puts the parties in a position like, we were never married. But to your point, it's very in today's world very hard to get an annulment. Annulments were sort of more of a the history of annulments. I don't know it as well as I'm sure some people, but the religious component of the church annulling marriages so that people could either continue in get remarried, continue in the church, all of these things. It was sort of a that component came into play. In today's world, legally, an annulment is basically doing the same thing where the marriage never really happened, but you have to actually prove things in order to be able to get an annulment. And frankly, in most cases, it's not worth going down that path and spending the time and the money to go in front of a judge and actually prove why you should get an annulment, because every state is a no fault state, and so in a divorce we don't have to prove why you should get a divorce. So that's generally why annulments don't really occur very often. So that's sort of the background of what an annulment is.
It's funny you were talking about the church because, going for Catholic, it was always, an annulment by the Pope was the Catholic divorce.
Yeah.
And it for a long time people thought, well, I have to get it legally in my state to make it valid with the church, but that was never actually the case. And so a
Right.
lot of people kind of talk about that. Um, and I like what you just said is there's not there's a no fault divorce. All of them are no fault divorces, but annulments aren't no fault. There's fault that has to be involved. I mean, there are grounds, I believe, like isn't it like you can't marry somebody. Well, let me put it this way. I think you can get an annulment if you marry your sister or somebody very close to you, or have like a dozen wives or husbands.
Yeah, there are. Every state's a little bit different too. So you'd have to look at the state law. But yeah, there are specific reasons for the annulment. Sometimes, and this is the one that's never fun to tell somebody that they have to go through it. But if they're say they were married previously and thought they were divorced, but they weren't actually divorced, and so then got remarried, then you could legally annul your second marriage because it's technically void by operation of law. So you could annul that second marriage. Fraud, like for the most common one that people think about, like trying to annul where it's not some technical, I mean, obviously you've got the cousins and sisters. That's a much more sort of fringe area of divorce annulment law. But the common one is I didn't know who this person was, so therefore I want to get an annulment. Fraud is what people sort of are thinking of, and fraud is a reason for an annulment, but fraud is very very like it's applied very narrowly. Like it has to be extreme fraudulent behavior, not oh I thought I knew who this person was and I don't know who they are. I mean that's going to be move to a divorce. Go get divorced. Um,
Do you have to do something? I mean, like fraud. Let's say you learn about the fraud, and then you stay married 20 years. At some point, will that make you not able to get an annulment?
yeah, 20 years. I mean, time is a huge factor in annulments. Like it has to be within, months.
Yeah.
The you're talking about the sort of I went to Vegas, I got married, I want to annul it. I mean, in a very short timeline, not, we were together for 20 years and I discovered some fraudulent behavior 20 years earlier. It's going to be a divorce because essentially you're trying to avoid having to divide assets and that sort of thing. So,
Right.
it's very uncommon. Whether it happens, I'm sure there are cases along the way that that there are facts that have risen to trying to advance those type of claims. But in 99.9% of cases, the answer is going to be you need to get divorced, and an annulment is not is not something that makes sense to spend the extra money and the time to go in front of a judge to explain why you should be able to get an.
Right. Right. And just the final one that you always hear is if someone's underage, you know,
Yes.
14
Yeah.
year old. And but even they, I mean, don't they even have to make they can't wait till they're 40.
I mean, it depends. Again, state law is very specific on that, and it's sort of changing. It always changes at times, and so that would be a factual analysis to determine if what that looks like. And so there's not really a blanket answer on situations like that. And that's where the answer is divorce is always available. The question is it possible to get an annulment? And that's
Right.
that's really something that we have to look at and compare it to the statute to see what's available for an annulment.
Yeah. So let's say somebody, is thinking that I want to do an annulment. Are how does an annulment work and what are the effects of an annulment on things like child legitimacy? Uh, is it still really your child or custody or support? I mean, are those things that are can be different than a legal separation or a divorce?
So they're two separate things. Like really, the annulment versus divorce or legal separation really refers to the asset components because the kid components, aren't affected by that. We can still do custody, parenting time, child support with unmarried parents as well. So, it doesn't have an effect on being able to deal with, kid issues. So that part, would be a separate case. So, if you were married and you could get an annulment and you had kids, you could get the marriage annulled, but then you would still do a custody, parenting type case. So none of that is affected. The things that are affected are the division of assets and like support. In Oregon and Washington, we have unregistered domestic partnership law in Oregon. So even if you were unmarried, you can still divide some assets. Washington has CIRs, committed intimate relationships, where it's the same idea. They're handled just a little bit differently, but it's that same situation where people have been together for a long time. They have co-owned property, and we want to divide property. So there's ways to kind of deal with all of those things, regardless if it's annulment or divorce, anyway. And then legal separation is, even a little bit different because you're dividing your assets, you're dealing with custody issues, but you're still legally married to the person until you file for divorce.
The the legal separation is is different, isn't it, than from two people who are never married and basically separate
Yeah.
because there's there's no real spouse.
Right. Yeah, it's just we're not dividing. That goes back to the analysis on, if there's intent of the parties to, pool resources for joint benefit. If you're unmarried, then we can deal with assets, that way. Legal separation, you're married, and the misconception about legal separation is people assume that means that you're just kind of separating and you come up with kind of a loose agreement. A legal separation is one that we are actually going through the same process as a divorce. We're dividing property. We're awarding spousal support. We're doing all of those things. So it's the same exact process. It just means that you are legally married after after the proceeding is finalized.
Okay, dumb question. Let's say you get a legal separation.
Yeah.
Um, 5 years later, I'll guess this is part A of part B. Can you unseparate? Can you go in and modify it to go away?
Yeah. So that's the difference with legal separation is that it can go back to just, it kind of goes away. Or if the alternative is that if you need to get divorced, you can basically then file for divorce at that point. In Oregon, you can convert a legal separation to a divorce within 2 years. After 2 years, then you have to file for divorce.
Let's say you're going to do that,
Yeah.
but you've already had a separation of assets. Can you go in and file for a divorce and say none of that matters? I want it to be rearranged from the start, or are you kind of going in with that and it's more like a modification, if anything?
It depends. It depends on the facts. So most of the time, that it's going to be, that the divorce then is very similar to the legal separation, but it doesn't have to be. And this is where it gets tricky, whether you choose to go down legal separation or not, because do you really want to go through the process twice? So inevitably, people get legally separated. They continue to live together. They create more like marital assets, and that's where the divorce can be different than the legal separation. So it can make you do it twice, and people don't always understand that. And so that it is important to just kind of talk through if that makes sense.
Yeah, it sort of goes back to unless I'm misreading this, to the separate property and marital property. So if you separate with a legal separation and then come back and want to do something, that stuff that you got, it sounds like it's sort of treated like separate property.
Uh, it can. It's again, it's factual. It's so hard
Yeah,
to
unless it's
it's
yeah.
so hard to generalize this stuff, because how parties acted, what their intent was, all of these things play into it. And so, the real answer is that, the classic attorney answer that, people hate is it really depends. We
Yeah.
really have to
No,
look at the facts and analyze it to determine what's going to happen.
that's the smart answer because what they're getting from their friends are this is what happens.
Yeah.
And understanding that it is all aspects of family law have nooks and crannies and turns and switches and things, you may think this is it, but it isn't it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's really the easy ones are I want to get a divorce, right? That's the easy one. Either side of legal separation or annulment or unregistered domestic partnership law, those are the ones where okay, we have to think through, we have to look at the facts, we have to understand, the pros and cons. And so, that anything that sort of differs from a sort of traditional divorce, we have to think through and just help our clients just understand if that's the route they want to go down.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it feels like there are pitfalls to annulments especially, but even legal separations, because it just, you got to be aware of what can happen in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. And you really want to go through the process twice because
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, it can happen and it happens. It's unlimited separation, but people then get back together and everything changes. So then you are, getting essentially divorced a second time. And, that's a lot of stress and money and, emotional, energy that goes into all of that. So it's really important to think through it before embarking down any of those paths.
yeah. But at least in a legal separation and in an annulment, the one thing I believe, tell me if I'm wrong, is that suddenly your children are no longer legally your children. They still are.
Correct. Yeah, it has
Yeah.
no, so that's a whole nother Facebook Live is the legal paternity or legal, parental rights. So none of it affects the legality of parental rights. That's driven by, the birth certificate and creating legal paternity or an adoption or, all of that's where the legal rights for parenthood come from, and so these cases don't impact that, regardless, unless there's a true change of legal parenthood.
Right. Well, thank you. This was really helpful. The sort of stuff out on the internet and just between people about, you know, annulments, legal separations, and divorces don't have any nuance, and there's a nuance to it. Yeah, I know of one couple that had a legal separation. I don't know, 40 years ago. They're fine. For them, it worked.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, some people do stay legally separated forever, if there's a reason for them to do that, and it works perfectly fine. It's the when people go into it and they don't know the pros and cons and just, elect legal separation without really understanding what that means, that's where, issues down the road can come up.
yeah. That because that's a good question. I don't know how IRS feels about it. Hmm. Are you really
Yeah.
divorced? Because they're pretty strict about divorce.
Yeah, I mean, we have asked that question to a tax attorney, and obviously I'm not a tax attorney, so I can't give full blanket advice. But the advice that we did get from a tax attorney is that if you are legally separated, you can still file jointly. But again, that can always change. So this is
Yeah.
not tax advice.
Yeah.
This
No,
is-
no, no, not at all. It's just another thing to be aware of.
yes, 100%.
I love it. All right. Well, we have gone through that, and I think, you know, I may be overstepping my bounds, but you, the need for annulment, it seems like, isn't as strong as it maybe was 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not as common as it once was. And the even the societal reasons for annulment just don't exist nearly as much anymore as the stigma of divorce has gone down. So
Yeah.
it's just less common today than it was at that time.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Louis, for sitting down and talk to us about annulments, how they differ from legal separations, how they differ from divorces, how divorces differ from legal separations, because it's just a great thing to know that there are these differences and you really need to talk to an attorney about them. So thank you for coming in today and just talking about that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Everyone, thank you also for joining us today. And if anyone has further questions, again, please feel free to contact our firm. We can get you connected with an attorney who can help you. Until next time, stay safe, stay happy, and be well.